Hello, thank you for joining us in today's cooking segment during the American Kidney Fund's Kidney Action Week. Kidney Action Week's initiative is to provide education on the prevention and management of kidney disease. We'd like to thank US Renal for sponsoring this event. And before I go into the cooking demonstration, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Whelan, and I'm a renal dietitian. I work with the dialysis population as well as patients who are trying to preserve their kidney function in the earlier stages of kidney disease. In addition to working with patients, I've also authored 2 cookbooks on the renal diet. And I started working with the American Kidney Fund last year. I review the recipes on the Kidney Kitchen website to ensure that they're appropriate for the kidney disease population. And so today we're going to do a cooking demonstration on one of the recipes on the website. The recipe we're going to do today is fish tacos. So before we start cooking, why don't we go and discuss some of the ingredients that we're going to be using today. So the first ingredient I have here is red onion. And so I actually chopped up the red onion prior to starting this, chopped it up very thin, and added the vinegar to it. And that's gonna make like a pickled onion that we're gonna use to top the tacos with when they're done. So just a word about onions. They are a wonderful food to include in your renal diet. And what I love about onions is that you can use onions freely without concern for potassium, and that's because they're not a high potassium vegetable. But despite not having a lot of potassium, they're very, very nutritious. They've got sulfur-rich compounds which have been shown to be really helpful for preventing cancer and promoting heart health, and they're very high in antioxidants. So onions are wonderful. And in the onions, I have some vinegar. The vinegar you choose can be the red wine vinegar or the apple cider. I went with the apple cider vinegar. And vinegar is also a great ingredient to have in your pantry for renal cooking. And that's because, it adds a lot of flavor. And in renal cooking, we want to find ingredients that add a lot of flavor without also adding a lot of sodium. So vinegar is a great one for that. So the other ingredients that I'm going to talk about here are our herbs and spices. So I've got some dried oregano, some cumin, and some ancho chili powder. And then I also have some chopped up fresh cilantro. And so a word about herbs and spices in renal cooking. Herbs and spices are excellent, really gonna help with providing flavor and making your food taste really good, which we know is so important. But what you'll wanna be careful of is like herbs and seasoning mixes, things like Old Bay or adobo. The reason they can be problematic is many of them contain a lot of sodium. And oftentimes I see phosphorus additives in the ingredients. So your best bet is to look for herbs and spices that are just, single ingredient or choosing the fresh. Okay, so the next ingredient that we're gonna discuss here is olive oil, which I've already poured into this little dish here, and that's gonna form the base of our marinade. So I'm actually gonna pour that into the bowl here to get it ready for the fish. Olive oil is a great cooking oil. If you're gonna have one cooking oil in your home, you should choose olive oil. And the reason that is because it has really strong anti-inflammatory properties. And kidney disease is an inflammatory progressive condition. So you wanna be eating foods that are really helpful at promoting, at reducing inflammation versus foods that promote inflammation. And the nice thing about olive oil as well is that, it really adds flavor and, it provides sort of, a nice depth to foods. So you don't need to be, eating fat-free or low-fat on a renal diet. You just want to be choosing healthy fats like olive oil. Olive oil is purely oil, so it doesn't have any protein, it doesn't have any phosphorus, sodium, or potassium. So I tell my patients, use olive oil liberally, because it's one of those few foods that, you don't have to really be worrying about those nutrients of concern. So that's gonna be the base of our marinade, and then we're gonna add in our herbs and spices. Okay, I'm just gonna mix that up here. All right, and I have actually reserved some cilantro here, some extra cilantro, which we'll use to garnish the tacos later. Okay, so now I'm just gonna add the cod to the marinade, and we're gonna spoon that over so it's nice and coated. Just turn it over a couple of times. This is gonna really soak into the fish and give it a nice flavor, which is gonna be really tasty. All right, so now we can put that in the fridge. And actually, I have some from earlier that I marinated, so we can go ahead and start cooking this cod, which has been marinating for the past 30 minutes. So I put the pan on medium heat, and I'm going to place the cod in the marinade into the pan once it's heated up. And we're just gonna let that cook for about 4 minutes on this side. So while the cod is cooking, I'm just gonna mention a couple of other steps in this recipe. So one thing that I didn't add to the marinade was the jalapeno. And this is totally up to your preference, but because not everybody in my family likes spice, I chose to chop up the jalapeno, and I'm gonna use it at the end to top the tacos with, and not add it to the marinade, because that can just make the whole thing a little bit spicy. So do whatever you prefer with that. And jalapenos, again, are good renal vegetable. They're low in potassium, so you don't have to be concerned about that. And the other ingredient here that I should mention is the corn tortillas. So this recipe does call for corn tortillas instead of flour tortillas. I wouldn't recommend, choosing flour tortillas. And the reason that is because most flour tortillas are pretty high in sodium. Corn tortillas are actually usually much lower in sodium. Always check the ingredients just to be sure. But what you should know about corn tortillas is that many do actually have phosphate additives in the ingredients. So you should look for a fresh corn tortilla if possible, and scan the ingredients just to make sure there's none in there. And if you are using a packaged one, just check and look for a brand that doesn't have the phosphate additives. So after cooking on one side for 4 minutes, I turned it and let it cook for another 2 minutes. And as you can see now, it's starting to easily flake with a fork. And so it looks like it's pretty much done. Maybe needs a little bit more time. It's a little firm there. We want to see it kind of really easily flake, and that'll tell us that it's done. It's definitely done on this side. And yeah, it looks like we're pretty much done here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the heat. And now I'm going to transfer it to a plate. So as I'm flaking this cod with a fork, I'm just going to talk a little bit about why I chose to use cod in this recipe. Cod is actually a really good fish choice for the renal diet. And that's because it's low in phosphorus as well as potassium. So seafood is one of those weird categories where, you don't really always expect that certain foods like seafood are going to have a lot of potassium or phosphorus, but some of them actually have quite a bit. But cod is actually low in both, so it's great for all stages. And in addition to that, cod is low in mercury, which is another thing to consider when choosing a fish to prepare. All right, so now we're ready to start serving up our fish tacos. And so I'm going to cut up the jalapeno because, like I said earlier, I'm gonna add that as a topping instead of in the marinade. So first I'm gonna just take out the seeds and then just cut it up really finely. Okay, and then I also have some limes here. I'm gonna quarter them. All right. Okay, so now we can start adding the tacos to the tortillas. And so to heat up your tortillas, you'll want to microwave in on a plate with paper towel, like kind of a damp paper towel sandwiched in between the top and the bottom of the stack of tortillas. Or you can also heat them up in the oven. I did the microwave. So now that they're nice and warm, I'm going to start adding the fish to the tacos. Now I only have 4 here, but this is actually enough fish for 8. So I'm only gonna use half of it. All right, don't they look great? Okay, so now we can add our pickled red onions. And you might even want to cut them up thinner and marinate them for longer. It's really totally up to your taste preferences. See the way those onions have that great color? Whenever you're trying to think about like what your diet should consist of, eat the rainbow, because when you eat lots of different colors, you're getting a variety of good nutrients from those vegetables and other foods. Okay, so now we can add our cilantro that we reserved from earlier. So I'm just gonna sprinkle that on there. And it's gonna add some nice flavor. And then I'm gonna add in the jalapeno just to 2 of the tacos. All right. Okay, now a word about the optional ingredients. So there is an optional ingredient of salt and of hot sauce. You can do both, or you can do one or the other. You know, a lot of people who are cooking in the renal diet are very afraid of adding salt, and they completely stop adding salt to all of their recipes. And this isn't really necessary. When it comes to the renal diet, it's really, really important to be mindful about sodium, and you definitely don't want to exceed the daily requirement of 2,300 milligrams. But most of the sodium that you end up consuming tends to not be from salt added in cooking. It often is just from foods that have sodium in them already. So things like restaurant foods or bread products, sauces, canned foods, packaged snacks. Really anything that has a label, you'll want to check the sodium content. But in a recipe like this, where most of the food is fresh, and you know, there's no like seasoning mixes or sauces, there's a little bit of room then for a little bit of added salt. Keyword being little. So if you do want to add salt to this recipe, I would suggest doing about a quarter teaspoon. A quarter teaspoon of salt provides about 600 milligrams of sodium. And 600 milligrams split into 4 servings is only about 150 milligrams. So that's not a lot of sodium per serving. So you can certainly feel free to do that. I actually didn't add any salt to the marinade, but I am gonna use hot sauce to top my tacos with here. Hot sauce is great because it kind of gives that salty flavor that you're looking for, but it also gives a little heat, which is nice. Always check the sodium content on whatever hot sauce you buy. This one has 110 milligrams for 1 teaspoon. So again, not really a ton of sodium. Of course, if you use a lot of it, it adds up, but a little bit goes a long way with hot sauce. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of that here. All right, so there you have it. Our fish tacos, 4 of them. And I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. All right, so there you have it, our finished fish tacos. I've garnished them with some lime wedges, and the lime is really delicious squeezed on the fish. So I hope you enjoyed watching today's cooking segment. Be sure to attend the kitchen. Be sure to go to Kidney Kitchen's website for more great renal recipes. And as always, be sure to continue reading those labels to scan for phosphorus additives and make sure that your food doesn't have too much sodium. And really try to eat foods that reduce inflammation. So things like vegetables, olive oil, fruits, whole grains, those are really great staples to have in your renal diet. And as always, follow specific recommendations from your doctor and renal dietitian. Thanks so much.